Welcome to Strength for Today's Pastor, conversations with current senior pastors and leaders which will strengthen and help you in your pastoral ministry. And now, here's your host, Bill Holdridge of Hoyman Ministries.
Welcome to podcast number 81. Today, we're going to be talking with Troy Drake of Calvary Chapel Meridian, Idaho, on the subject of house-to-house fellowships. So if you're wondering what a house-to-house fellowship is, hang on, we're going to get to it shortly. Troy Drake is the founding pastor of Calvary Chapel Meridian, Idaho, having served as its pastor since
2009.
2009. Well, great. Hey, welcome to the program, Troy, and so glad that you're willing to join us.
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks for inviting me, Bill.
Oh, you're welcome. It's going to be good. So I'm going to quote a bit on the subject of house-to-house fellowships from the church website, ccmeridian.org, sort of a lead-in to our discussion. So here's the quote. First of all, it starts with a quote from Acts chapter 2. Now all who believed were together and had all things in common. So continuing daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people, and the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved. And then the comment following the reading of the scripture. The website goes on to say, the early disciples understood that togetherness is essential for the growth of each person and the church itself by being in close community with other believers. The Christian life is way better in community. And yet, this is the one area that is often lacking in the lives of Christians. So my comment to that statement on the website, which is a great statement, is, yet we've lost so much of the sense of community, and for many reasons, but we're so much more self-sufficient today, just culturally and in our churches, or at least we think we're self-sufficient. We become more distant from other people, maybe more than at any time in history. But the website article goes on to say, we must intentionally, therefore, do life together. Rather than just hoping that it will happen, we have to choose to set up a purposeful way for the people in our fellowship to engage with each other. We call them house-to-house groups. What can you expect at a house-to-house group? Each group has a meal together. They discuss and apply Sunday's sermon and support each other in prayer and practical ways as they seek to join in God's mission. You know, and if I'm somebody reading this website, Troy, for the first time, I'm wondering what Calvary Chapel Meridian is all about, and I'm thinking about visiting or attending your church. This is an attractive description of what's going on in house-to-house groups. I think it's really, really good. But let's just back up a little bit, because this didn't happen in the first year of you starting Calvary Chapel Meridian. So maybe it would be good if you could give us a quick snapshot of the history of Calvary Meridian.
Yeah, sure. Our church actually began before I came along. It was a Bible study in a backyard that grew and eventually ended up in a building in a little town west of me called Middleton. And the pastor, Don Heisel, led it for several years, but he decided that the Lord was moving him on. And so my pastor at the time was mentoring me to plant a church, and he was on Don's board, and he asked me if I wanted to take over leadership of that one. So my wife and I prayed and decided to do it. And our first Sunday was Easter in 2009, and about 30 people were there. And it went well for the first year. More people were coming and hearing the word being taught. But I sensed from God that I was supposed to actually move it to Meridian, a few miles away. And so I prayed on it for a while and shared with our elders and waited, and we eventually decided to move. And it was the right move because God has really blessed our church. And we've actually moved around a bunch in our town in Meridian since then. We either outgrew our leased locations or the owner wanted to do something else. And I think we're actually on our 8th location in 11 years. And we're currently meeting in a junior high school in Meridian, but we've purchased land and we're in the process of building our own campus. We're hoping to break ground sometime this year.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. So, just for a context, why don't you just briefly list each of those 8 places that you've been in? We first were here, then we were here.
Yeah, let's see. So we shared a building with Seventh-day Adventists when we first moved into Meridian because we couldn't afford the rent for the entire place. So they had it Saturdays, we had it Sundays, and then after that we rented a standalone church building for a while, a couple of years. Then we had church in the park for an entire summer. Let's see, we were in a school, a junior high school for a little while. We were in a warehouse that we redid for a while. We were back at church in the park. We were in another school, and so I've lost track. There's been so many places that we've been. It's funny because we'll drive around town and one of my daughters will say, "Hey, we've been in that place. We've been in that place. We've been in that place." And it's been a little bit of a stress at times, but we've learned to be flexible.
Yeah, I was going to say, blessed are the flexible, they'll not be broken. And certainly the church hasn't been broken. And it's been kind of fun to watch. I mean, I've been friends of yours for 6 years or something like that,
Yeah.
6, 7 years. And I've been familiar with some of those places. And, the church just keeps moving, not literally, but also it just keeps going. That doesn't seem to stop anything.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. So for a number of years, you had the typical menu of public services and Bible studies, and people were being equipped in the Word and so on and so forth. So what was the typical weekly schedule during those years prior to house-to-house groups?
Well, we had Sunday services, weekly events, Wednesday night Bible study. I'd say it was a packed church calendar. But to me, it was kind of confusing, and we had ministries vying for space on the calendar and the bulletin and the announcements. We had a few Bible studies, but most of them were at the church, and I'd say they were pretty good. But I wouldn't say that community was really emphasized with them. They weren't very relational because just one person was doing most of the talking, which is what everyone was already getting on Sunday and Wednesday night. So I actually asked God to give me some direction on how to change things.
A lot of times, Troy, and you and I have talked about this over the years, but a lot of times what churches do is they start new ministries because somebody in the church has an idea, a study they'd like to do or a program they'd like to see happen. And so then the pastor says, okay, go for it. And that's how the bulletin gets filled up with all of these ancillary ministries and ideas. But you made a shift eventually, and we'll talk about that in a minute. You made a shift from that approach to being proactive with your vision and moving forward in what you felt the Lord was leading you and your leadership team to do moving forward. And that's how you ended up with House to House. It seems to me that's the way it went.
Yep, that's right.
So that leads us to the main thrust of the conversation, Troy. What is a House to House group, and what was the great need, you've already alluded to it, that led to this kind of an intentional approach?
Well, the first few years of our church, I used to just kind of let things happen, sort of like what you just described. I handled most things really casual and open-handed when it came to the things we did and things people wanted to do and discipleship, really. Because I was under the impression that people would just kind of figure it out for themselves. And because I kind of did. So I just thought that if we just taught people through the Bible on Sunday and Wednesday night, then they would have a rich relationship with Jesus and other people, and that our church would flourish and have lots of committed followers of Jesus. But that's not what was happening. It drew a bunch of people, but it kind of stopped there for most. And, I believe in the transformational power of the word, but I came to find out that that's not all there was to having a healthy church. And I had to be much more intentional about getting people together outside of the main church gatherings. And, what I saw was we often had a bunch of disconnected people attending our church, or folks would show up a few times and like it, but then disappear, or folks would know a lot of things, but they weren't really growing much, especially in relationship with others. And I saw other things like a line of people would want to talk to me on Sunday after services, but they wouldn't want to talk to anybody else. And that was strange to me, Or our events would be well attended, but not many friendships were materializing. If somebody needed help, they would go to the pastors or call the church office. And all this stuff put together, I guess I thought it was just normal or the way it was, but it was bothering me. So over time, I just was praying and asking God to show me what to do to fix it. And, about this time, I got together with a pastor from another church in town, not a Calvary Chapel. And as we were chatting, he said, "So is Calvary Meridian a serving church or a groups church?" Huh. And that was an interesting question because I had never thought about that before. And I said, well, I guess we're a serving church, because at the time, about half the people in our church were serving. But later, as I thought about it, I realized that this might be part of our problem, that there's nothing wrong with lots of people serving the Lord, but I remember that even they were often disconnected with their team even, So I'm asking God, why aren't people really growing? Why isn't there that like one another love that I see in the New Testament? Bill, our church felt a little bit like watching the Rose Parade. It's like, here comes the float, and then it stops for a little while in front of you, and then it moves on, so that's not very relational. Yeah. So I just went back to the Bible, to Acts 2, and I noticed that community was heavily emphasized then. They had meals together, they prayed together, they opened the Bible together, and they did it in homes, And the early church was building relationships with one another, and we really weren't. So we started focusing on small groups. I laid it out in front of our pastors and elders, and we prayed on it and did some research and decided to do this and call it House to House, where we would emphasize building community amongst the believers, and we would insist that they would meet in people's homes and share a meal together and pray together and worship together and open the Bible together. And, I said that, just looking back at my own life, that's really what happened to me. When I just went to church as a new Christian and I heard the sermons, I grew, but it was slow. But when my wife and I got involved in small groups and began to do life with those folks and serve in a ministry team in conjunction with that, my life with the Lord really took off. And we point back to that as being really transformational for us. It led to a huge network of believers that I could count on that loved me, And really, I just wanted our church family to have what I have. To grow and to love and feel useful for God and have a community.
That's good.
I used to just hope that community would happen, but decided to be more purposeful.
Yeah, that's great. So a pastor should be very concerned about disconnection in the church body and that people are not connected with each other. That's really a leadership issue. And don't you think, Troy, that there are cultures that are more readily leaning in the direction of disconnection? I mean, I think of the time that I lived in California. I could get in my car from my house and I could drive to a store. I didn't have to talk to anybody. I could do my business at the store and then I could go back home and I could do this and do that. And I wouldn't have to have any connection with any other human beings. I didn't want to, any meaningful connections. And I just thought, this is horrible. And then I went on the mission field to a Latin American country. And boy, were they a completely different culture altogether. They were warm and embracing. I walked down the street. They'd invite me into their houses. They never knew who I was before. They never met me. And I thought, this is the way it is. And then I would be gone from that place and I would come back months or years later and walk down that same street and they would recognize me. I was their friend for life. And I contrasted that with my experience in the United States. And I think, man, what a disconnected culture we live in.
Yeah. Yeah. Our church is in a bunch of subdivisions. And, Meridian is a lot of family homes and subdivisions. And, you have 6-foot high privacy fences and everybody, you drive into you open up your garage door, you drive in and close the garage. And our culture is getting more and more like that all the time. And actually this goes against the grain of how folks are. I think that we all want community. It's even advertised in new home developments, But I think a church leader has to be intentional about finding ways to make it happen and not just hope it happens.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, it's time to take a quick 20-second break. You're listening to a conversation with Pastor Troy Drake of Calvary Chapel Meridian, Idaho, on the subject of developing home-based ministry within the church. So please hang in there. We'll be right back.
You've been listening to Strength for Today's Pastor. Foyman Ministries appreciates your participation in prayers. If you'd like to help financially support this podcast, you can go to our website at foymanministries.com/donate. Thank you.
Okay, we're back. Well, Troy, this has been a great conversation so far. Now, you've had house-to-house groups for about 5 years now, correct?
It could be. I think it's more like 4, but yeah, I've sort of lost count.
Okay. Well, you made specific decisions about how they were going to function. You and your leadership team prayed about all this, planned it out. You were intentional. So how often do they meet?
Let's see. They're weekly meetings. I think you have to meet weekly, or they tend to fizz out. We've done spring and fall 12-week sessions in the past with summer and winter breaks. So that's typically how we've organized it.
Okay, but now there's been a recent shift or a change in how what the schedule is for the year. What's the current schedule now?
Yeah, we keep retooling them, Bill, little changes to improve things all the time. And so now we've gone to where this fall we're starting them. We're going to do 4 12-week sessions, 4 10-week sessions, I should say. Run them all year long with small breaks in between. We think that's a better approach for us right now.
Okay, so does that mean that a person who's part of a group in the first 10-week session, they could feasibly join a different group in the second 10-week session and so on?
Yeah, we used to, I call them house to house because in Acts 2, they went from house to house. And so in order for people to know a group of others, I asked them to try other groups. I used to more insist on it, and now I don't. If people make a real connection someplace, then I'm happy they do that. But it's an opportunity if maybe one group doesn't work out that great, or you just want to try something else, that folks can move around a little bit if they want to, and that would be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. But if they decide to stay within the same group or the same structure, that's okay too?
Yeah. We encourage them just to be happy with one another and grow together, as long as they're willing for a new person to join in with them.
Now, I can imagine, Troy, that when you started this intentional push toward house-to-house groups and your leadership team was on board, that this was so different for the church. What were the immediate reactions of the people in the church, or those that were used to the way it had been?
Yeah, I think that the come and sit and listen mentality was hard to get past, because some people would attend the occasional Bible study, but to have the small groups be an emphasis of a church, and not that we stopped doing services, but we actually did, for a season, stop doing Wednesday night Bible studies to put the emphasis on small groups and meeting in homes instead of just doing another service. And so that shift was definitely a change. And I think that there, especially within Calvary Chapel, there's often attend events and services and programs and things like that, but that small groups are not necessarily emphasized. It certainly wasn't where I came from. And so it was a shift, and there was some pushback with some, but a lot of people really embraced it, especially once I convinced them that this would help with what we were faced with. One of the things the pastor has to do, to me, is explain what the challenge is, and what the solution could be. And if we would try this, it could help us with a current challenge that we're having.
Yeah, that's a good approach. So the people were not used to the new way of doing it, so they started doing it, and you have emphasized in a lot of the groups anyway, the sermon-based concept. So what has been your thinking behind the sermon-based groups, and how have those gone?
Yeah, I borrowed most of this from other guys. There's nothing new under the sun. But sermon-based groups have a lot of benefits over everybody doing different things. Because in our case, we use it as an opportunity to focus on the application of the word. I felt that's what was missing, because I would teach on the weekend or midweek of what it says and what it means, and then do some application. But I wanted us to emphasize in the groups to really figure out how to apply it to their lives and then go do it. And so we actually teach the leaders to ask questions about how they're applying what they've learned. And so that aspect of sermon-based is really good, because everybody's talking about the same passage. They have to come back to it a couple times a week, right? With Sunday, and then at the group that they go to. And we also provide questions beforehand, so the group has to do some homework, and some of them will even bring the questions to church on Sunday, because we publish them before the Sunday service, and they can fill in the answers and think about it during the week, and then take them to the group that meets later in the week. So for us, sermon-based has some real advantages in that way.
When Jesus interpreted the parable of the sower in Matthew 13, he said that the one who receives the seed sown by the wayside is the one who didn't remember or understand what he was told, and the wicked one came and snatched it out of his heart.
Wow.
So, a lot of people, they walk out of the meeting hall or the place that the church meets on Sunday, and if you asked them a half an hour later what the sermon was about, they may not even be able to tell you,
right.
Because they haven't done anything with it. And so this gives them an opportunity to talk about it, think about it. I think it's great.
Yeah. When we learned from Pastor Chuck Smith that I don't remember how many times I heard him say, we want to make sure we are being doers of the word. And that resonated with me personally, and I want that to resonate with our church too.
You've said so many things that I totally resonate with. Troy, you talked about how this was your experience. As you looked back, you thought, well, this is how I grew. I got involved in these kinds of groups. That was my experience as well. And then you mentioned the one another's. I mean, without relationship, how do we do the one another's?
Right.
And such an important point. And then another thing that I think about, Troy, is that if I'm not in relationship with other believers, how in the world am I going to know ever what spiritual gifts God has given me? Because there's no one to minister them to if I'm without relationship.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's so many things about it that are fulfilling as a Christian. And I heard you say it once, like you said, we've been friends for a while. And you have said often that you just want to feel useful. And a lot of Christians often don't feel useful. And to be in relationship with others, often that's where you'll discover how to be useful for God's kingdom.
Your house-to-house groups also have a component of sharing a meal together. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit. How does that help the groups, and what does that do to a group dynamic?
Yeah, again, I just go back to Acts 2, and it seemed like that they were eating meals together. And there's just something about that. Obviously, that culture probably put a lot more emphasis on that and the meaning of it than we do today. But still, I mean, when you have friends over and so forth, having a meal together, there's really nothing like that. And I think it's important that they do that in the groups because you just get to know each other without an agenda, So I have them. I urge the leaders and hosts to spend about half the time just eating a meal together. And they don't have to do it every week, but I've found out things about people over a bowl of soup that I wouldn't have known any other way. And I think it's just a great way to just talk, chat about life and what's going on and learn about each other. And so you just sort of build on that.
Wonderful opportunity. So as far as the fruit of all of this, Troy, you've been doing them now. I'm going to say 5 years. You're going to say 4. So whatever. Been doing them for a while. And so what's the fruit been? I mean, is it better than it was in your church? Is it the same? Or have you noticed changes in the church body? What's the fruit?
Well, it's a work in progress, but I have seen fruit. And the fruit is in the love and unity in our fellowship, the dependency on one another. I mentioned the people that used to line up and talk to me. Now hardly anybody is interested in talking to me after service because they come and they want to see their friends, And it's funny because just this past Sunday, I walked out. We're meeting at a school, and I walked out on the patio out in front, where we do most stuff. And I felt like I was almost interrupting these groups that are forming because they don't really have an interest that much in talking to me unless it's something specific or they just want to chat with me as a friend because they already have their friends, And I smile every time I see that because I'm kind of working my way out of a job,
Yeah.
What I've noticed, Bill, is the ones who come to speak with me on Sunday are typically new people now because they don't have community in our church yet. The ones that do, they go hunt down their friends,
That makes sense.
So that's one fruit that I've seen from it. Another thing I've noticed that changed, a big shift in our church, was that they respond to each other's needs. So I'll hear about a hospital visit after the fact now, that their friends were such a blessing to them. Someone in the church came and visited. I didn't even know they were in the hospital. Their group helped them. Not that I'm not interested in that, but what a blessing to know that the church body is doing this for one another, or they help them move or babysit their kids or even give financial support. It's really kind of amazing, that shift that you would think would be how the Christian church ought to be. And ours really wasn't that much to begin with. And I think that we've really only scratched the surface with this.
Well, the role of the pastor teacher is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry and to actually allow for the body to do the work of the ministry rather than everything going back to the pastor and to the leader.
Right. I would agree.
So that's great. Well, so I guess it's been worth it. I mean, there are obviously the typical objections and the work involved, like, man, planning meals, that's a hassle, or childcare, that's hard to figure out, or this or that. But it all works. If people have a mind to do it, it works. Like building the wall of Nehemiah in Jerusalem, right? If they have a mind to work, it happens and it's fruitful.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that that you have to be willing to put in the effort to promote this kind of love and unity in a church. I don't know that it just will happen on its own. There's obviously things you can do that some things would occur, and of course the Holy Spirit moving amongst the people is more powerful than anything. But I think creating an environment where there's that unity requires some effort, and so the leadership, to me, in our situation, has had to do some hard work in order to make it happen.
Well, good on them. So I imagine that there have been some kinds of changes and adjustments you've made with the H2H groups and the way they're led and all of that over the years. Can you think of anything significant that has changed that might be helpful to point out?
Well, I think that one of the things that we've changed is we used to have mostly topical groups, like marriage-specific groups, or, groups on creation, or financial peace university, and those kind of things, and those are good. But now what we've gone to is we limit those to just a few, and try to focus all the rest on sermon-based, for the vast majority of them. So that's one adjustment that we've made. We also try to continually refine our leader and host training, specifically what the expectations are, who we're looking for to do that. We've found that the best kind of leaders are ones who are really warm and sort of are trying to promote what our mission, vision, and values are. So then it's not just a information, but they're trying to build relationships with other people. And then, like we talked about, switching from the 2 sessions to the 4 that go year round, because we've found that we need something for new people to plug into when they show up at our church, because those were some of the ones who would wander off. And if the Lord wants them at our church, then I want to do our part to try and involve them in what we're doing.
Well, I know, as far as being a pastor is concerned, that we're always growing, we're always developing as pastors, and and you've been doing this for a while now, 11, 12 years as a senior pastor. What have you learned about ministry personally, and doing the house-to-house groups and overseeing them as you have?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say there's at least three things that I've learned. One is it's a good way to try new ministries, because, and I think you brought this up earlier, rather than creating a new program that someone just comes along and wants to start, or a new ministry, you can plug most things into this that you already have. So let's say that somebody wants to start an evangelism ministry, for example. Well, you could say to her or him, well, why don't you, get some good curriculum and insert it into the next house to house or small group session that we have, and see who shows up, and and see what the interest is and pray with them and learn and apply these things. And then we'll see where it goes, So we've sort of adopted that approach. Instead of just starting a new ministry, we'll sort of test drive them in our small group ministry. So it reduces clutter that way,
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I've learned is small groups can be the best source of discipleship if you do them right.
Mm-hmm.
You got to do them right, or it could actually have the opposite effect. Because I think that with us personally, and I know that this might be common in other churches, that you tried shortcuts to discipleship. And I'm just talking about things like events. So rather than using retreats or conferences to supplement discipleship, we sort of expect a big thing to come out of them, and that people's lives would all be changed, And what we found out is it really didn't, It's harder to have a small group ministry as a focal point of the church, but to me, it's better because it's more effective than putting, some sort of event or program to try and do that. So that's another thing I've learned. And then the third one is, and I touched on this a little bit already, but it reduces the complexity of our church. Because this is a main ministry of Calvary Meridian, we funnel everything through there, at least as much as we can. So whether it's the men's ministry or women's ministry or youth groups, that's the hub. And so it simplifies things for us, and we do less stuff. I used to believe that the more stuff that was going on in our church meant that we were making a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So I said yes to everything early on. I mean, our church was small, and we had a trifold bulletin. And I look back at that and I'm like, really? That much stuff, But now I've come to believe that what I need is a simpler church, Otherwise, I think that we're trying to do everything, and it makes it harder to reach people and accomplish what we're trying to do. So I wanted to just zero in on our mission. And I think that with us, the house-to-house format and the fellowship with believers who want to grow in a casual, friendly environment has been a big difference for us. So we've learned those things from house to house.
Those are big. Each one of them is big. Each one of those three things that you talked about are what I would call pregnant concepts. They're just giving birth to all kinds of other concepts as well. That's great. Well, Troy, now's your opportunity just to share anything you would like to share with pastors on the subject of small groups or the concept behind H-to-H groups or the ministry, whatever. These 2 minutes are yours. Are you ready?
Oh,
1, 2, 3, go.
I guess, Bill, I would just ask pastors to ask themselves if they're happy with the way their church interacts with one another. Do you think that they're involved with each other? Do you think that they're growing like like they ought to be? Do they truly care for each other? Or this is one that I asked myself, does it resemble the early church, Because our mission was always to make committed followers for Jesus. And when we started to ask if that was happening, I honestly had to say no. A little bit here and there, but not generally. So I think, just because you give me the opportunity here, I would just ask or urge guys to seek the Lord about whether or not they're fulfilling the mission that God's given them in terms of, growth of the believers, right? Because to me, if we don't reach the people that we already have, how are we going to reach the rest of the community? And that was bothering me. And I think it's way better now than it ever was before. So perhaps you pastors might ask your key leaders if they think that your church is relational, and if not, why not? And to me, just by asking those questions and seeking the Lord on what to do about it, started some good change for us. And who knows what Jesus might do for you guys.
Well said. Those are rare questions that pastors and leadership teams seem to be asking themselves, but they're good questions. And that doesn't mean that what they have been doing is a failure or wrong or anything.
No.
But it does mean that there is always a better way if the Lord will point that out to us as we ask him. So well done. Thank you, Troy. Well, Pastor Troy's teachings are available at ccmeridian.org/media. Also, if you have questions and you'd like feedback from Troy about anything, just send us an email at strongerpastors@gmail.com, and I'll pass that info on to Troy, and he'll, I'm sure, get back to you. But thank you so much, Troy, for joining us on this podcast episode. I think it's been helpful, and appreciate you sharing the story.
You bet. It was a pleasure. God bless you, Bill.
Well, before we go, I'd like to encourage you to visit our website at pointmanministries.com/podcast. We now catalog these podcast episodes for easy reference. Also, as you visit our website, you'll discover other ways our team can help encourage and strengthen you in your ministry. So we'd love to hear your feedback or follow up with any questions you may have. Just send us that email at strongerpastors@gmail.com. And so from the staff, pastors, and board of directors here at Pointman Ministries, we wish God's very best upon you and your ministry. So long until next week.
Strength for Today's Pastor is sponsored by Pointman Ministries. You can find us at pointmanministries.com. That's spelled POIMEN ministries.com. If something in today's program prompts a question or comment, or if you have a topic idea for a future episode, just shoot us an email at strongerpastors@gmail.com. That's strongerpastors@gmail.com. May the Lord bless you as you serve Him, His pastors, and His church.